Right, I've been asked to announce that the Shir is generously sponsored for the entire 24-25 academic year by Scott and Linda Hannaford. So we thank them for their sponsorship. And welcome once again, Bruchim Habayim. All right. Today we hope to finish as much as we can the entire first Mishnah. We started speaking about it and going through some of the in-depth discussions and questions. We left off last week by where it said Moshe kibel Torah misinai u'misara liYehoshua, and we spoke about Yoshua, and the Gemara in Zvachim on Kuf Tes Zayin has a discussion about Yoshua and Yoshua's wife. Actually, we know that Yoshua married Rochav. Rochav was in the first beginning of the Sefer Yoshua. Rochav is described as being, as the pasuk says, she was an Isha Zona. Isha Zona has a number of interpretations according to the Mefarshim on the Navi, but the most accepted one was that she actually provided mizonos for others. She was an innkeeper, and that's the word zona, from the word mizonos. But the majority opinion is that Isha Zona is literal, that Yeshua's wife was a well-known, you might say, lady of the night. She was an Isha Zona, and she lived at the entrance to the city of Yericho. And she was so well known that people would come from all over to participate in the debauchery that went on around her. And yet, Yoshua marries her and has children with her, all girls. And those girls ended up giving birth to some very famous Nevi'im that are mentioned later on in Tanakh. So we have a situation where there's a person in Tanakh that had a rather spotty reputation, to be kind, using that terminology, and at the same time, Yoshua ends up marrying her. And it didn't stand in the way of the future of Yoshua's family. Why is that? The reason is because when it comes to tshuva, when it comes to correcting past errors, absolutely nothing stands in the way. It doesn't matter how checkered one's past may be. It's possible to effect tremendous change, and not just ordinary change, but change to the point where someone who was on the lowest level of human endeavor is capable of rising to the highest levels and becoming the matriarch of a large family of great people. And Yoshua saw that in her. And she, in her desire to go and do the right thing, promulgated the concept that you can take that which was of the poorest behaviors and turn it around and use it for positive. For instance, when I don't want to read it because it's going to take a little too long, but when it talks about the time that Yoshua sent the spies to enter Yericho, it says that she lowered down the rope of Anitze Pishtan, ropes of flax. And the Gemara in Zvachim wants to understand why do we have to know what the ropes were made of? I mean, is that really crucial and important? Do we have to know what they were made of? And the Mefarshim, Rashi himself on the Gemara says she was utilizing the exact same things that when she was misbehaving, she was now turning it upside down and using them for the purpose of good. It's possible for a human being to take the same traits that were ignoble and turn them into the most noble of endeavors and switch things around. This is something that's crucial when we begin Pirkei Avos, because when it says that Moshe kibel Torah misinai, Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, umisara li Yoshua, and gave it over to Yoshua, that means that the tradition, the Masorah of the Jewish people is crucial to the continuance of the recognition of the veracity of Torah, because Moshe got it from Sinai and passed it on, and even though it went through Yehoshua's family, and Yehoshua, you might say, well, he had a little bit of a tainted history. Absolutely not, because he was able, and she was able, to utilize what was at one point totally unacceptable and change it around to something that was going to be noble and proper. So this is a very important introduction to Pirkei Avos. When we introduced the entire Pirkei Avos, we said that we start with the introduction in every perek. When it comes to Pirkei Avos, we start with Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelik Le'olam Haba. All of Kol Yisrael has a chelik in Olam Haba. Shenema v'amek kulam tzadikim le'olam yeshu aretz neitzem atay masa yodai le'espoyer. And we see that Kol Yisrael, every Jew, all the people have a chelik in Olam Haba, and it's possible that chelik in Olam Haba is going to last them forever, as long as they don't throw it away. And even if someone along the line might have not done everything that was exactly proper to do, it doesn't mean that it's gone and lost forever, because there's always tshuva. And tshuva means that you can change. Anyone who comes along and says, I can't change, they're flying in the face of what the concept of tshuva is all about. It doesn't matter what the past was, because once someone has an opportunity to change and they effect some change, and I think I have to be cautious here and just mention that change doesn't mean radical change overnight. I think that's something that's it's a story of myths. You know that, one day this fellow was a murderer, and the next day he became the greatest tzaddik on earth. No, it doesn't work like that. But it works that if a person has a certain amount of misbehavior patterns, they can actually take those same patterns and turn them around, just like Rosh did, and gave birth in the future to many, many Nevi'im. So that was something that we mentioned at the end of last week's Seder, that we were going to speak a little bit about Yoshua and Rosh. Now, I'd like to go back just for a minute and discuss another word that's crucial in terms of the first Mishnah. It said Moshe kibel Torah misinai umisara li Yehoshua. That's the first Mishnah. He was mekabelit, and he was misora li Yehoshua, the Zekanim, and so on. That's the misora. The Patak Rav is famous. He was a famous Hasidic Rebbe. Actually, he came from the city of Patak, and he was part of the Babava sect of Hasidim, and he himself was a brilliant Talmud Chacham who lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and was the Rav in a shul called the Litaviska Shul. And he wrote a sefer called the Beis HaHaron. And the Beis HaHaron, he mentions and asks the following question. Why couldn't it just say, Hashem Nosan Torah LeMoshe, V'hu Nosan LeYoshua, Yoshua Nosan LeZakenim? What's this business with Moshe Kibel U'Misora? Why does it say that Moshe was Makabel the Torah and then he gave it over? Why such a terminology? So the Pirkei Rav comes along and he says, there's a tremendous difference between someone giving you something, like no saying matana. If someone gives you a matana, you can take that matana and do whatever you want with it. If somebody gives you a present, you can do whatever you want with it. Somebody came to your house on Purim with shalach manas, and he was the sixth person who brought you a bottle of wine that you don't drink. You don't like that wine, or you don't drink wine, and it's the exact same bottle each time, because they were all on sale at that time, so everybody picked up the same one. See, you now have 6 bottles of things that people gave you as a matana. What do? Either next year you're going to give it back to them, or you're going to just share it with whoever shows up at the door, because a matana is something you can do whatever you want with it. Someone gives you a present, you have a right to dispense with it at will. Of course, the only hope you have is that you don't give it back to the same person. But otherwise, it's a matana is something that's yours to keep and do with it what you want. But when Moshe Rabbeinu was makabel the Torah from Sinai, he wasn't given it as a matana. He was given it as a Kabbalah. And his job was Misora, to give it over to the next generation. And this has to be understood, because when you have a matana, as we said, you can do with it what you want. And some people think that the Torah is just a personal gift of their history and family tradition. And when times change a little bit, when the generations become enlightened, we're in 19th century America. It's not like Europe, where you had to toe the line according to the dictates of the Rav of the town. We're living in the time of the Enlightenment, where new ideas are fanning across the globe. Concepts such as democracy, and everything has got to be according to the people's will. And today we're enlightened. The great age of the classical composers and poets and writers, thinkers. And so we're not stuck in the old system of thinking. And we have a right to change things, maybe even to reform things. Reform in order to make changes in the Jewish tradition, which is, of course, what happened during those early years of the so-called Enlightenment, because 1,000 years in Europe, the Dark Ages were present. And Dark Ages means that people were just not thinking. There was very little production in terms of philosophical or even literary production that could help human beings think through some of the difficult questions of life. The Jewish people, of course, always had that present to them. We always had the Chumash and the Navi and the Gemara and the Mefarshim and the great codes of the Rambam and the commentaries of the Ramban and the brilliance of some of the most beautiful writings that the Jewish people have. In the darkest of ages, Rashi was writing the commentary that was going to be the most widely read comment on all of the Torah. And the Ramban was enlightening Rashi when everybody else was debating whether or not you had a right to think or say. And the monarchs were ruling. So along comes the Beis Aharon, and he says, Moshe was given the Torah, and he was makabel it, and it was something that he had the responsibility of taking care of and protecting. Because when you have something that's given as a gift, and you have to protect it, you can't just take it and give it aside and push it aside. And lest you think that, well, when times change, I have to change with them. Like some of the Jews in Persia said, when in Persia do as the Persians do. And that led, of course, to the Yom Tif of Purim. But when it comes to Moshe's Makabel, the Torah, and it's his, he has to pass it on as a Mesorah. There's a famous discussion later on in Perek Beis, in Mishnah Yud Beis. The Mishnah later on in Pirkei Avot says, Haskein atzmacha lilmo Torah. Prepare yourself to study Torah. And then the Mishnah makes an unbelievable comment. And it says, She'ena Yerushaloch. What does that mean? Haskein atzmacha lilmo Torah. Prepare yourself to learn Torah. She'ena Yerushaloch. Because it's not your Yerusha. Wait a minute. Don't we say, Torah tziva lanu Moshe morasha kehilas Yaakov? Don't we say that Moshe commanded us the Torah and it's a morasha for the family of Yaakov? So what does it mean when it says later on in Perek Beis, Mishnah Yud Beis, Haskein atzmacha lilmo Torah she'ena Yerushalach. Prepare yourself to learn Torah because it's not your Yerusha. Now what does Yerusha mean? So Yerusha means inheritance. Prepare yourself to study Torah because it's not your Yerusha. What's the difference between Yerusha and Morasha? When we translate that sentence later on in Pirkei Avos, Haskein atzmacha lilmo Torah, prepare yourself to study Torah, she'ena Yerushalach, that it's not your inheritance. What do you mean it's not my inheritance? We say every day, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha kehilas Yaakov. So what are you telling me? It's not my Yerusha, it's Morasha. It is my inheritance. So there is a tremendous difference between the word Yerusha and the word Morasha. What's the difference between them? Yerusha means you're inheriting something. It's like the gift. If you inherit something, your family leaves you over $1 million. That's nothing today. $1 billion, okay. If the family leaves you over $1 billion, what can you do with that $1 billion? Whatever you want. You want to make a wedding in India that costs $500 million? Go right ahead. It's your business. You want to do with your money, you can take the money and do with it what you want. You want to hire a plane to go up to the sky so that you can get closer to the eclipse and see it better? Right? You want to do that? Go right ahead. It's your money. Do what you want with it. Yerusha means, is that I can take it and do whatever I want with it. But the Torah is not your Yerusha. The Torah is a Morasha. What's a Morasha? A Morasha is a family heirloom. A Morasha is something, a Morasha, the concept and the grammatical form of the word Morasha means that you have to pass it on to the next generation. The parents entrusted you with this family heirloom, and your responsibility is to take this heirloom and pass it on to the next generation. She'ena Yerushalach. It's not your Yerush. It's not something you can squander and do whatever you want with it. Therefore, Haskein atzmacha lilmo Torah. You have to prepare yourself to the study of Torah. And if you don't prepare yourself for the study of Torah, you're not going to have it to pass on to the next generation. And that's why it says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe commanded us the Torah. Morasha kehilas Yaakov. It's a family heirloom that you have to pass on. She'ena Yerushalach. It's not something that you have as an inheritance and you can go and squander it and do what you want. And therefore, it says, Moshe kibel Torah misina u'misora liYoshua. It wasn't that Hashem gave a gift and said, now take the matana and do what you want, but it was given over as a morasha kehilas Yaakov, and therefore we have to take very, very good care of it. Now later on in the first Mishnah, if you'll take a look at your text, if you have one in front of you, but it says that he passed it on to Yoshua. Yoshua gave it to the Zakanim to the Nevi'im, and the Nevi'im gave it over to Anshin Nesagdola, right? And then it says, Haim Amru Shlosha Devarim. They said three things. Now these three things that they said were the three things that were going to be absolutely necessary for the continuance of the Morosha. What were the three things? Number one, Hevu Misunim Badin. We started discussing this a little bit last week. Be deliberate in judgment. Are we speaking over here to judges, or are we speaking over here to ordinary human beings? You and I. Hevu Misunim Badin. We have to be very deliberate in judgment. What is this referring to? We'll come back and explain a little bit more in a moment. Second, ve'amidu talmidim habei, and stand up many students. It's interesting terminology. Stand them up. What do you mean, stand up many talmidim? We'll have a chance to discuss that a little bit today. And third, v'asu siyag laTorah, and make a fence around the Torah. Let's go back to the first one. The first one. Hevu misunim badin. We have to be deliberate and careful in judgment. And again, we're not speaking to judges here. We're speaking to ordinary human beings. How are we supposed to interpret what Chazal said at the very opening of Pirkei Avot that would stand us in good stead over all the time when it says, be deliberate in judgment? Who are we judging? What are we judging over here? Every one of us judges. Every one of us has categories. Many times you meet people and you say, oh, I got this guy pegged. You spoke to him for 5 minutes. I got this guy pegged. I know exactly. You're judging. You're judging. Right away you're judging. You're making assumptions. Recently, I was told about a young man who was read a shidduch. Somebody proposed a prospective bride for him. So they went out on a date. And after the date, the young man came home and said, not for me, not interested. I'm not interested. So why not? I don't know. That's not for me. The parents said, listen, you don't know why you're saying that. Maybe if you went a second time, you'll see differently. Give it another try. It's hard to decide just on one meeting, right? So he listened, and he went out a second time. The second time he came back, he said, I'm going to go a third time. So there was a change, because this is misunim badin. If you're deliberate and thoughtful about another person, it's possible that you're jumping to conclusions, unless it's egregious. Unless somebody does something that is totally out of the realm of chesed and kindness, that might be a different story. But in generally speaking, you really can't give up after just one date. You have to be misunim badin. You have to be deliberate in judgment. And when we're dealing with judgment, we have to be deliberate, because we could be jumping to the wrong conclusions. And according to the Chassam Sofer, what this means is that you have to be careful, not only not to jump to conclusions, but done lekaf zechus. You always have to try to judge someone lekaf zechus. The Gemara in Shabbos has a fascinating story. You might say it's the premier story about judging someone. Well, this is a shver Gemara of Shabbos. Can I know? When you're talking about judging someone lekaf zchus, the premier story here is actually in the Gemara in Shabbos. I wrote down the daf here. I actually know the daf, but just while I'm talking here. It's just slipped my mind. But where's my but the Gemara in Shabbos comes along and says on Daf Kuf Daled, the Gemara brings up a case of Dan L'Kaf Schus. It's the primary story about judging someone L'Kaf Schus, and this Gemara is spoken of quite often throughout. Anyone who tries to give an example of something that is L'Kaf Schus, it tells us what we're dealing with here. Okay. So what happens is there's a fellow who comes from the north. He comes from the south. He comes from down by Beersheba, and he's looking for work in order to earn some money, in order to bring money home to his family. So he finds a job up north, up in the Galil, and he finds a job that's going to pay him fairly well to take care of someone's flocks and produce and so on. And he works for him for 3 years. And after working for 3 years, it came time for him to go home to his family and to bring them the parnasa that he earned over all that period of time. And he comes to the boss and he says to him, I'd like to have my wages. I have to go home and I want to bring the food to my family. And the man says, I'm sorry, I don't have any money to give you. I worked 3 years and you tell me you have no money to give me? Okay, so give me some produce. So the boss says, I'm sorry, I don't have any produce to give you. So the man says, okay, so give me something else I can barter with. Extend a loan to me so that I could be able to go home and bring some money. I'm sorry, I have no cash on hand whatsoever. And it goes like this on and on and on until the man realizes I'm not going to get any money. And he goes home feeling very, very low. As the Gemara says, he went home b'pchi nefesh. He went home with a low feeling of what's going on. And he comes to his house and he spends Yom Tif. He came home for Rosh Hashanah, and Rosh Hashanah goes by, and Yom Kippur goes by, and Sukkot goes by. And after Sukkot, his boss from the north comes to his house and he brings him food to make a seudah that we haven't had a chance to have, and he pays him all his wages. And the man is very thankful, and they start discussing, and the boss says, tell me, what did you think after 3 years of working for me that I promised you the wages? What were you thinking when I told you I don't have any money to give you? He said, I'll tell you, I thought that you had taken the money that you had and invested it in a very promising business venture that was tied up for at least 2 months. And you had agreed to allow the person that you gave this money to hold on to it for 2 months. And therefore you had no cash at that moment at all. He said, and what did you think when I said I had no produce? You worked in my fields. You knew I had tremendous amounts of produce. What did you think when I told you I have no produce to give you? So the man said, I thought that maybe you had produce, but you didn't yet take any meiser from them. And if you didn't take any meiser from them, they're not allowed to be eaten and given away. And so you couldn't give me any produce. And so on in each step of the way. The boss asked him, what were you thinking when I told you I don't have? And you knew that I was a wealthy man. He said, each step of the way, I recognized that there may be some difficulty with your giving me the money, but not that you didn't want to pay me, and not that you didn't want to give me the money. The Gemara over there says, when you judge someone l'kav schus, you know what the advantage is? That when HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges you, He's also going to be judging l'kav schus. If you find a fault in a person and you judge it, when possible, again, without any egregious foolishness, and you judge l'kav schus, that in turn stands for you as a benefit to be judged that God judges you l'kav schus. That's what the Gemara ends up saying over there. And the boss said every single thing you thought that was possible was exactly what happened. And he blesses him, because you judged me l'kav schus, Hashem should judge you l'kav schus. So
they say it was Rabbi Akiva that was the work.
The what?
They say Rabbi Akiva was the work.
There are some opinions that say it was Rabbi Akiva. Yes, thank you. From here we see that there's a tremendous benefit to be done l'kav schus, and that's why when the Mishnah says the first thing, havu masunim badin, be deliberate in judgment, be careful about the way you judge someone, because if you're done l'kav schus, it comes back. It comes back and it does benefit for you, because ultimately when you judge someone l'kav schus, you in turn are also judged l'kav schus. So that's what it means when it says amidu. That's what it means when it says havu masunim badin, be deliberate in judgment.
Would this apply if you're judging someone l'kav schus and you ended up making a very bad mistake? Do you still get l'kav schus in return? Is it worth the price?
I think when it says l'kav schus over here to judge someone l'kav schus, it's not in a case of where it's a monetary open and shut case, where it's an egregious point. We're required to done l'kav schus. If we make a mistake and judge someone positively, and we turned out that it's wrong, you still have recourse to get your money, so to speak. You have that recourse. People do make mistakes. None of us are infallible. But when the possibility exists to judge the l'kav schus, and it's not, like I said, egregious, it certainly is for your benefit that Hashem will judge you l'kav schus too. Okay. The next thing that the Mishnah says is ha'amidu talmidim habeh. You are to stand up. You are to stand up many talmidim. And when it says ha'amidu talmidim habeh, it's talking about standing them up. What do you mean standing up talmidim? You're supposed to teach them and give them an opportunity to learn as much as they possibly can. Why does it use the term ha'amidu talmidu habeh? Stand them up. What do you have to do to stand them up? The Gemara, also in Shabbos, has a discussion about the aleph beis. Fascinating discussion about the aleph beis. The Gemara asks the question, what does the aleph beis mean? And so on and so forth. And the Gemara brings up an interesting question. What are the words for truth and falsehood? What are the two words in Hebrew? Both three letters.
Emes and sheker.
Emes and sheker.
They
right.
stand differently.
Right. Emes and sheker. What do you mean they stand differently?
Sheker and shin kuf resh, one basis. The other emes, aleph mem, tough have more than one basis to stand.
Okay. What else about those three letters? The difference between them? Any other differences?
So, sheker is the letters that you have.
And emes?
The beginning of the alphabet, the middle of the alphabet, and the end of the alphabet.
You want to give a shir? Excellent. Very good. Sheker are three letters that are exactly one next to the other. Kuf, shin, resh. All right, it's shin, kuf, resh. But they're all one letter next to the other in the aleph beis. Kuf Shin Reish. Absolutely together. That's sheker. Emes, no matter how you spread it, it's the first letter, the last letter, and the middle letter of the Aleph base, as this fine gentleman said. And the other difference is the three letters of sheker. When you take a look at a Sefer Torah, I'm talking now about Ashkenazi writing in a Sefer Torah. The Sephardi writing is a little bit different, not much, but I'll explain that in a minute too. The three letters of Kuf, Shin, and Reish don't have a leg to stand on. A Kuf, as you know, only has one leg and it's top heavy. So that if you try to stand the Kuf up, it's going to topple over. The Reish, also, it's got a on top and a leg. And if you try to stand that letter up, it's going to topple over. The Shin, in Ashkenazi script, has 3 points, but the 3 points come to a point on the bottom, so that even the Shin can't stand on its own. In Sephardi writing, the Shin does have a little bit of a base. There is a discussion in the authorities who came up between the Beis Yosef and the Ramah of exactly how to form the Shin in the writing of a Sefer Torah. And according to the Beis Yosef, it's got to have a little bit of a base. According to the Ramah, it's coming to a point the Shin can't stand up at all. Why is there such a difference? I'll explain that at the end of this, and we'll see an interesting point. But all three letters, according to Ashkenazi script, Kuf, Shin, and Reish, will topple over. And therefore, they have to stick together very, very close, or else it won't stand at all. If you're gonna tell a lie, you better make sure that you got all the facts clear and there's no loopholes, because a good lawyer is going to ruin you on the stand. He's going to try to get at it, and it'll easily fall over because it doesn't have a base to stand on. Now, the Sephardim, however, are going to say the only lie that you could possibly maybe get away with is if it has a little truth to it. Therefore, the Shin has a little bit of a base. In fact, Rashi says that Kol Sheker she'ein ima emet ksat tchiloso be'emes lo miskayim besofo. Do you know where Rashi says that? He says that in Parsha Shlach, when the Meraglim went to speak about the land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael, and they came back and they started saying nice things. You know? Zavas chalav v'devashi, kol sheker she'ein imo k'tzat emet b'tchilosa lo miskayim b'sofa. So the Sephardi Ksav says you have to have a little truth at the beginning, so the Shin has a little bit of a base in the Sephardi writing. Okay, Emes has an Aleph with 2 legs, and you can stand it up because there's 2 legs to stand on. The Mem has a base. It'll stand up by itself. And the Tuf also has 2 letters, and it'll stand up by itself. So when the Mishnah says, Ha'amidu Talmidim Harbei, stand up many Talmidim, what the Mishnah is saying, start out with the Emes. Torah's Emes. Titain Emes Liakov. Teach them the Emes. Because the Torah, no matter how you slice it, no matter where you tried to find fault in it, you're not going to find any. The Emes stands on its own. The proof? 5,784 years, and it's standing on its own. It stands on its own. You know how many philosophies have come and gone? And you know how many loopholes have been punched in the various thoughts and different types of behavior that the world has tried to give out with? They've promulgated all kinds of theories, and they've all been torn asunder at one point or another. Every single proposal to help society exist beyond just the here and the now has somehow not been able to do it. Even those who thought that they were the most brilliant philosophers in the world, they weren't able to get the world to be stood up on a good base. Well, the emes lasts forever. And since the emes lasts forever, therefore, when it says in the Mishnah, ha'amidu talmidim harbei, it doesn't mean have a lot of students. If you have a lot of students who are going, every which way, you're not going to have any kiyum. But if you ha'amidu them, if you stand them up on their legs so that the emes comes out, then it's going to have a kiyum and it's going to last forever. And of course, va'asus yogla Torah, make fences around the Torah. Good fences make good neighbors. You have a small hole in the dike, you can flood the entire town. You have to have good fences around the performance of the mitzvahs. And that's why there are so many mitzvahs to Rabbana that we do that are not the oraisa, so to speak. They're not totally based on the oraisa ideas, but they're extensions of them in order to protect situations. I'll give you an example. There's a law, v'asisa maka legagecha. You should make a parapet around your roof. You have a flat roof, and someone can walk on the roof, and the roof is more than daled amos off the ground. Okay, so if somebody falls over it, they can really be hurt badly, and of course, if it's a high one, not just hurt badly, you can kill somebody, right? So vasisa maka legagecha v'lo sasim damim biveisecha, and don't put blood in your house. If you make a good parapet around the roof, no one's going to get hurt, and there won't be a case where somebody gets killed. Now, this law is the oraisa law, that if you have a roof that's a flat roof, and people can walk on it, you have to make sure that you have a fence around that roof. How high does the fence have to be? How high does it have to be? So it has to be at least 10 tefachim. All right? There are different discussions about how big a tefach is. But we're going to go with what most people accept. Somewhere between 3 and 4 inches, a tefach. A tefach is usually a tefach, a fist, right? So it's about 4 inches. 10 tefachim is 40 inches. Okay, you want to take a smaller measurement, 36 inches, 3.6 inches to a tefach. So you have to put a parapet around your roof. Now, what happens if you have a balcony in your house? It's a big house, or a shul. You have a shul with a downstairs where the men sit, let's say, in a balcony for the Ezras Noshim, and the balcony doesn't have any fence in front of the ledge where the women are standing. That's terrible. Somebody can get killed, God forbid. So what do when they make a balcony upstairs for the women? So, of course, they put a fence. The fence has to be, at least, like we said, minimal 36 inches. I was a Rav in a shul in Borough Park, known as the Young Israel Bethel of Borough Park. One of the most beautiful, beautiful structures of a shul you'll ever see. It's absolutely astounding. It's just beautiful. It has 1,378 seats in it. It was known as the Chazan Shul because all the great Chazanim performed there. The most famous, of course, was Moshe Kusevitsky and Yibad L'Chaim, the Chazan that I was with for over 30 years, Ben Zion Miller, who also a fantastic Chazan. And there was always a choir and people would come, and there were very often times that the shul had 1,200 people in the shul. All right, so I was hired as the Rav, and in June, a yeshiva called Prospect Park Yeshiva rented out the shul for their graduation of the 12th grade girls. It's a girls' school. Yeshiva Prospect Park, and the high school was having graduation, and they needed a big venue, and they wanted to have it done in a place of Kedusha, so they rented the shul, and they made the graduation on a Thursday night in the shul when it wasn't being used for davening. One of my chavrusas who I learned Hilchas Erev with him, and we actually built an Erev in what they called in America bungalow colony. We used to build Erev in there, and we learned together quite well. He's a medical doctor, Dr. Neil Ringel, and Neil had a daughter graduating from Prospect Park, and because it was a girls' school, so all the women were downstairs, and they told the men that they should sit upstairs. So Neil, who's a Talmid Chacham, was standing at the front row of the balcony, and he looks at the height of the rail that was there in the shul, and he started measuring, a little bit, not exactly, but in a cursory fashion, and it's ridiculous. It doesn't get anywhere near 10 tefachim. It's like 25 inches, 24 inches. It just doesn't cut it. And the space in between one rail and the other rail was more than 3 tefachim, so that you couldn't say lovud, and you couldn't say, if you know the halachic concept of lovud, that if it's within 3 tefachim, it's considered as if it's all one. And he said, this is terrible. So after the graduation, I was giving a shia Thursday night in shul. He comes down to me, he says, you got to come up and take a look at this. This is terrible. Do you know that the shul doesn't fulfill the mitzvah of a sisa maka legagecha? I said, come on, what are you talking about? The shul's 100 years old. Don't tell me that now all of a sudden it's not acceptable. He said, look, you got to go up there. Have you ever been up there? I said, why should I go up there? It's a ladies section. What am I doing in the ladies section? He said, I'm telling you, I would never go up either, but they had the men upstairs, so I wanted to see. So he said, go up. I figured, okay. I'm taking a tape measure, and tomorrow morning when I come to shul, I'm going to go up and I'm going to start measuring. I go up the next morning, I take my tape measure. I said, oh my goodness, he's 100% right. I haven't even got 2 feet over here. I've got an 18-inch little stoop, and then I have about a foot or more space over here. So the total maybe, 24 inches, but 28 inches, but there's a space and it can't be loved. What? This is ridiculous. How come nobody ever noticed this? This can't be done. It's impossible. So I figured I gotta do something about this. The first thing I did is I called one of my rabbanim, who I was very close with at the time. My predecessor in the Young Israel Bar Park was Rabbi Gedalia Dov Schwartz, Zechreinu Levracha, one of the great poskim of our time in America. I said, Rabbi Schwartz, what do you think about this? He says, well, it's not really good, but you just became the Rav there, and you're going to start a war over there, and you can kiss your job goodbye. You don't want to do that. I said, yeah, but I can't leave it like this. I got to do something. He says, okay, so see what you can do. Use your head and figure something out, and so on and so forth. Okay. I figure Sunday morning everybody's in shul. They have a breakfast afterwards. I'm going to take some of my chief balabatim. I'm going to take them upstairs, and I'm going to show them, and I'm going to tell them why I'm doing it. And they're going to say, "Come on, Rabbi, don't be machmir on everything." I said, "I'm not machmir, machdir. I'm not interested in being machmir. What? You got to do something about this. This is terrible." So they said, "What are you talking about? Come on, take a tape measure. We'll go up. We'll show." So the first thing I did is I took them down to the front of the balcony, in the front row, and one of them says, "Whoa, this is dangerous." I said, "Oh, thank God. Now this is good. I'm good. I said, "Yeah, you see, this is really doesn't." Fulfill. She said, but the mechitza has been good all these years. I said, not mechitza, maka. What's a maka? I never heard of it. Maka, yehitza? No, it's mem ayin kuf hey. They start with the maka. What's a maka? I said, it's not a maka. It's not a maka, mem kuf hey. A hit, it's maka. It's a fence, a parabaret. You got to know the halacha. Oh yeah, what's this? I thought the mechitza is good. Again, with the mechitza, back and forth. Finally, I convinced them that they got to do something. And they said, okay, we'll take it at the next board meeting. We'll take it up. I said, no. Rosh Hashanah is coming. You got to get this done before we fill up that balcony. I don't want somebody fall off on Rosh Hashanah. It's coming the summer now. If that's Rosh Hashanah, we'll have the place going to be full. You can't do that. We got to do something now. I told you the mechitza is good, Rabbi. There's nothing wrong. I said, it's not the mechitza. It's the mak. Again, I explained it again once more. Okay. They had a board meeting, and they asked me to come down and explain. I gave a whole shiur on a makkah. And at the end of the shiur, after a 40-minute shiur on makkah, one of the guys says, Rabbi, we've discussed the mechitza many times. It's in good condition. I said, not a mechitza, it's a makkah. Mechitza, makkah, mechutzpah, it's all the same. It's all the same. Now let's vote. By the way, Rabbi, can you please go out? Because we don't want any prejudicial things over here. I said, okay. Dr. Neil Ringel was the one who I learned with and who pointed this out to me. Hashem has a strange way of working because Dr. Neil Ringel's mother was the secretary of the board. So at the board meeting, they started discussing what's going to be with this rabbi with these chumras. He comes up with what? She gives a bang on the table and she says, what are you people kidding? Are we Orthodox Jews or are we not? If the halacha says that you have to fix it, you got to fix it. And don't give me this business that you don't know why and it's been here for many years. Just because someone's got the hole in the roof for 10 years doesn't mean it's got to go on forever. If Rabbi Stowe says we have to have it redone, it's got to be redone, and that's it. They were ashamed. So they had a vote, and the vote was 28-1. So they asked this fellow why he voted against it. He says, democracy. You got to have democracy. So that was it. Anyway, it's coming Rosh Hashanah, and I told them I'm closing off the first 2 rows of the balcony with yellow caution tape so that nobody can walk down to the front of the balcony and get hurt, God forbid.
Why didn't they do it? I thought it was resolved.
Because it was already no time to get it fixed. It was so close to Yom Tov already. At that point, we called. Now you have to understand, this shul is so beautiful, and everything there is done, with the highest level, and there were brass bars that were part of this mechitza, and the brass is very expensive when you have a shul that's half a block long and half a block wide. It's very, very expensive to fix. So we called down one of the brass manufacturers who's going to make, instead of 1 bar, 2 bars. So now we have lavud between the lower level and the upper level, and now it fulfills the requirement of a makkah. And he gives us the estimate, and he says it'll be $28,000. $28,000. We're going to get $28,000 to spend on, what they call frivolity. Okay, but we have to do it. We cautioned off the front 2 rows, and after Yom Tov, we had the fella come down, he measures it up, and so on, and I'm there when they finish it, and I say, okay, do me a favor, give me the bill, I'm going to present it to the board. He takes the bill right in front of my eyes, and he rips it up, he said, this one's on me. Can you imagine that? He didn't charge the shul a penny. This is my mitzvah. He wasn't a frum Jew, but he said, this is my mitzvah. And he donated the new bars, both of them beautiful, didn't take anything away from the shul. Why? Because Vasisa Maka Legakecha. And this is really rabbinic on the inside of this balcony. This is under Va'asu Siyog La Torah. This is under that rubric of where the Mishnah says, make a fence around the Torah. And that is something that if we stick to our guns and we're protecting of Klal Yisrael, will always turn out well. It's unbelievable what Siyata D'Shmaya can do to help you accomplish when you are sure about where you're going, what your stance is, and how you're going to promote the observance of Torah Lishma. Yetz Hashem, next week we'll continue on with the next Mishnah. Okay.